If I ever leave this world alive, well, thank you for the things you did in my life. If I ever leave this world alive, I'll come back down and sit beside your feet tonight. Wherever I am, you'll always be more than just a memory. If I ever leave this world alive.
So, who are we talking to?
Rachel Anderson.
Okay, and so we are here to talk about the history, but so paint us a picture of what was it like in Sacramento? What were you doing before SANE started?
I was working as a therapist at a drug treatment program where they told us to not waste our time with people who injected or with people who injected heroin or used heroin because they had antisocial personality disorders and were untreatable by definition. So I had to start a program for those particular people. I don't like being told I can't do something. And it lo and behold, it was successful. We helped people change their lives. I had another counselor that worked with us, and we were the only two in the shop that didn't do 12-step therapy. We did harm reduction stuff. And then this virus came along, HIV, although we didn't know that that's what it was at the time. And the infectious disease doc at UC Davis Medical Center they were trying to do research with people who injected drugs, and they were just getting rolled. They'd go out in their little white coats and try to do research, and of course they would get these outrageous stories like, I do 3 grams a day, I'm so poor, and they'd get ripped off for all their money, or conned out of their money. So he said, we need to find somebody who can talk to these people, those folks. So he heard about our program and came and asked if we would help him get people tested, because that was the big thing in those days, people didn't want to test, because why would you want to know you're positive when there's nothing you can do about it? So we started working with him, and then he asked me if I'd consider doing research full-time, and I said yes. And I got a job at UC Davis tracking the progress of HIV among people who inject drugs. In 1991 and 92, we did a sero survey, a blood survey, and found out that among those who primarily injected methamphetamine, there was an 11% rate of HIV, and among those who primarily injected opiates, there was a 9%. So the two together came to 10%. Epidemiologically, that's a very dangerous place. That's where 1 in 10 of the people that you contact during the day is going to be infected now. So rate of spread grows exponentially. At that time, New York went from 10% to 60% in 4 years. So we knew we were at a really critical juncture. We had no political support here. Well, the health department supported us, but they don't have much political power. This is a real law enforcement town. But we said, we have to start syringe exchange. We had been going to the DPA conferences and the NASIC conferences, and we're planning to start it. We were trying to do the political thing here, get authorized and all of that. But when we got the results from the sero survey, we said we can't afford to play that game anymore. We have to just start it because people are dying. And so we figured out, we had a kind of a little mini task force of everybody in the region who had a stake in the game with HIV. Psychologists, psychiatrists, medical providers, drug treatment counselors, grassroots activists, the whole 9 yards. And we would meet regularly. And so we decided that who was going to do it? Anybody who had a license or certified job kind of thing, like Linnell was certified to work inside the jails doing HIV prevention. We weren't going to allow them to be, or have them actually doing syringe services. It made no sense to risk the few services that injectors could get to start another one. Turned out there was two of us that could do it. Jim Britton, who was a counselor at the local methadone clinic, and I were the two that had to do it. So we contacted Nason and got a little startup money, but we had to figure out how to do it. Sacramento County is 1,000 square miles. The table on the street for 2 hours, the card table on the street corner for 2 hours, wouldn't work here. There isn't a local drug scene, a public drug scene, if you will. Here, people go to people's houses and apartments and use in that way. So we were trying to figure out how two of us could get enough syringes out to make a dent in the virus spread. We also found out in that sero survey that we had approximately 17,000 people who injected drugs on a daily basis. And then there were another number of people, we never actually calculated it, people who injected primarily speed, because in those days speed users and heroin users were pretty separate camps. But they didn't inject it on a daily basis. They would inject it on paydays or when they were around other injectors. So that's another group that we had to look at. So how are we going to get enough syringes out to make a dent in this virus spread with two people? And how to do it, since the card table thing was not an option. So we figured, well, how are the drugs getting around? And because obviously that was going on quite successfully. So this is in the days of pagers. Dealers wore pagers. And so we thought, oh, that's a great idea. So Jim had a lot of connections with some of the bigger dealers. And so we went and, did our little dance for them to convince them that it would be to their benefit to support our program and keep their customers alive. And so we had a lot of dealers buy in early in on the program. And they became like satellite exchangers, where they would exchange for a network of people. And then we just started targeting social networks as opposed to individuals. And if you wanted, so we published the number, obviously not in the major papers and that sort of thing, but underground. And people would call in and leave their number, and we'd call them back and make an arrangement of where and when to meet and what they needed. And that went on for quite a while. God, I don't even know how long that went on. Oh, it must have been until 2013, because that's when we got our first office. It was authorized. No, must have been earlier, because it was authorized in Sacramento, in the city of Sacramento and Yolo County, which is the county next door, in 2007. The county of Sacramento, to this date in 2022, still, has not authorized syringe services because they think it looks bad. Where do you want me to go from here? I could go this way or that way, or...
Well, I just want to paint a little more picture. Okay, so you're starting to do deliveries, right?
It was all delivery.
Okay, so
we had no site.
We had no site. So how did that? Does Sacramento have an open air drug market? How does that work in deliveries? How do people find out about you? Was it through the dealers?
A lot of it was through the dealers. We had to do all delivery because we were underground. It's not like we could open an office and say, come on in, because the sheriff would have showed up and that would have killed the program. So like I said, we did the pager thing, and when we made an appointment with the person who called the pager, where and when to meet, oftentimes that would be at their house or their residence, and their social network would be there when we showed up. So we would provide services to a number of people, and we knew that we had to engage users to be part of the program. So we encouraged people to get enough syringes that they could provide their social network that wasn't in the room. The next layer, services. So we trained the members of the first social network how to be street outreach workers, how to be syringe services providers, gave them enough supplies so that they could take it to their networks, who would never be contacting us directly for various and sundry reasons. And so it was all done by delivery. Sometimes we would deliver to residences. I mean, a lot of times to residences, but we also would meet people in parks, not near schools, but we would meet in parks or neighborhoods that were known for more drug activity than, the hoity-toity ones. But there was not a real public drug scene. Like I said, people used in their homes or their residences for the most part.
And so, like, were you guys worried about being arrested?
Oh, yeah.
First
thing we did when we opened was recruit a criminal defense attorney who was willing to work for us pro bono. Isn't that what all businesses do? So we found this guy, Clyde Blackman, and he provided us pro bono legal services for up until probably about 2015, 2017, somewhere around in there. He's now retired. And which worked out really well, because when Linnell stopped working in the jails 4 years after we started, then she came and started working with SANE. And she was going to a home to deliver, and there was a social network there. And she tripped over a couple of sheriff's officers on the way in. And in this bag she had like over 1,000 rigs. So they cited her, arrested her, and we were going to go to trial and use the necessity defense, which was what was being done at that time. There were several trials, 5, 6, I think, of syringe services in providers in California, predominantly in the Bay Area, and everybody was using the necessity defense, which in essence is, if you go walking down the street and you see a house on fire and you know there are people in there, but the house is all locked up, you can't get in. Can you break into the house to get the people out? Even though you're committing a B&E, you're doing it out of necessity to save lives. It's a public health defense. Well, the judge here, being the political town this is, said because the state legislature had already considered bills for syringe services, he said that the legislature had taken the field. That's the phrase. So the courts weren't going to be a part of it. And so we lost in what is called a demurrer hearing, which is basically you just go in to show the court that you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's, and that you have standing to be in this case, this court case. And so the judge ruled that we didn't, because we couldn't use the necessity defense. Linnell had to plead guilty. I believe to this day it's the only needle exchange case that has been lost. I think so. That's our claim to fame. Anyway. So she was barred from doing syringes for 3 years. They gave her 3 years probation, and they watched her, so we couldn't let her do that. So she did her 3 years, and then she eventually came back.
The day it finished, didn't she?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The day her probation was over, she was out slinging rigs again.
And that happened during the illegal times, right?
Oh, yes. We were still underground. That was 2001, I believe.
So, like, did you feel like you were always being hunted in that time?
Well, I don't know about hunted. We weren't real important. Like I said, this is a really political town. This is like D.C. It's the capital of California, 6th largest economic unit in the world, and all that, blah, blah, blah. So nobody makes a move in this town without thinking of the political consequences. So there were a lot bigger issues than us. Although I will say the State Office of AIDS hated to see us walk into the building because they knew we would say those words.
Did you feel like you were tolerated then?
Yeah, the health department provided us as much political cover as they could. We agreed that we would always keep them up to date on what we were doing so they would never get blindsided. And they really liked us because we were addressing a very critical issue at the time. We were doing work that they couldn't do because they didn't know how to get out of the white coats to talk to people in a real way. And when, like, a wound botulism outbreak happened, they knew that if they got word to us, we could get it out to the street really fast. And we've stopped a couple of those infections. So they were really supportive. Like I said, as much as they could be. No money, but some political cover. The cops, like that. If we tripped over them, they would arrest us. I don't think they were ever, like, even thinking about organizing in any way to come after us. Well, the city police were very supportive. They tend to be higher educated. I shouldn't say that. Anyway, city police were pretty supportive. And actually referred people to us. Sheriff, not so much. But we were way down his list of priorities, if that makes sense. But we knew we had to be very, very, very discreet because if they did try to follow us or use us in ways to get to our participants, that would be a bad thing, if that makes sense.
Yes. Are there any services that you started adding or strategies you added in the syringe services during the illegal times?
Well, I think the delivery model, the 100% delivery model, was new at the time. We actually got trashed by other programs at conferences sometimes for giving up control and recruiting participants to be major players in the program. Our program has always been designed, implemented, and evaluated by program participants. If we're not serving them, we're not doing our job. So, sorry. Cue me again. My brain just farted out.
No, just talking about, like,
oh yeah, services. Okay.
Strategies and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
So I think the delivery model was one of our big contributions to the methodology of syringe services, and I think the programs that were outside major urban areas like us, and like the Indiana program and that sort of thing, showed that the methodologies used in urban areas weren't going to work in suburban and rural areas. And so that's where the idea that the only really best practice there is with syringe services is it has to be responsive to local context and culture. And I think that was an important contribution. And then in 2001, with overdoses escalating, we started an overdose prevention program, but we didn't have access to naloxone. So it was mostly teaching rescue breathing, prevention, have an overdose plan, 2 holes in your arm, better than one in the ground, that sort of thing. And then in 2004, Franz came on board and started distributing naloxone and developed the naloxone distribution program.
And who's Franz?
Franz is my husband, and he's an outreach worker from Melbourne, Australia. And we met at the International Harm Reduction Conference in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and married, and he came to work for us and brought his expertise.
And you were still illegal then?
Oh, yes. We were, I prefer the term unauthorized.
Sorry? Unauthorized?
Yeah, I don't like to give them that much power. Yeah, we were unauthorized until 2007. And we're still unauthorized in Sacramento County. No, we're not. Now, we just, a couple of weeks ago, got authorized by the state. So we're as legitimate as we can get now.
far as that goes.
And then we started, another thing we did that we're really proud of is we started providing buprenorphine or Suboxone treatment on site at the syringe exchange in 2010.
And I believe you were one of the first in the country at a syringe exchange.
Yeah, at a syringe exchange. Yeah.
Talk about SANE's, that connection to that direct service and treatment, because there's been divides, and you really merged them early on.
Yeah, well, again, we worked really hard at building a reputation of that if you came to us, now that we had an office, but even when we didn't, you would be treated at every single encounter with dignity and respect. And that we were attached to evidence-based actions. So we didn't adopt a process just because it sounded good, like just say no or something stupid like that. We believe that harm reduction is evidence-based, and that's why it works. You look at the efficacy of an activity to see if it gets you what you want. And that's not to say that we do just scientific research, which we do. We have been respondents and principal investigators in academic research projects, but we also value the input that we get from participants. We have participant satisfaction surveys, and of course we're always just talking with them about it. How are things going? Can we do something different? Can we do something better? Can we do you want us to get rid of something? And we get a lot of feedback that way. And so we value qualitative anecdotal evidence as highly as we do the quantitative, traditional, research-based kind of evidence. So in a time like the 80s and the 90s with HIV, which were very scary, we didn't have even a name for the damn disease for so many years, let alone a test or things we could do. You can imagine the amount of misinformation and myth that was out on the street. So we worked very hard to cull a reputation of accuracy. If you come and ask us, we will get you the most accurate answer to a question that we can possibly find. And if we put out, like we make our own brochures, we make sure that everything in those brochures is absolutely accurate to the best of our ability. And we keep on site at the program the evidence that we use to come to those decisions, so that if you still aren't convinced, we will show you the literature used, the satisfaction surveys, the comments, how we came to that decision, and we'll discuss it with anybody at any time. And we've had our minds changed a couple times. And I think that's an incredibly important piece of what SANE does. This latest pandemic shows how dangerous misinformation and myths are. And drug users are lied to all the time. People who use drugs are lied to all the time by the government, by the medical establishment, based on the stigma and bigoted attitudes towards people who use drugs. So we felt that from day one, we had to provide dignity and respect, a safe and welcome space, and accuracy in our messages and our programs. And I'm proud to say, still do that today. We just finished a study with the CDC that we're real excited about.
And so when you have the MAP program, that has to be in an office, right?
Well, not so much.
Yeah.
I mean, it does to a certain extent.
Especially in the start.
Yeah. Well, when they were doing where you had to be 24 hours into withdrawal, you pretty much needed an office to treat people kindly, And we had a quiet room with a noise machine and, all of that. But then another kind of innovation we have jumped on, we didn't come up with it, but we've probably use it more than most other programs, is called microdosing. And so people, it's a way of coming on to the drug a little bit at a time and building it up. And then when you get to your daily dose, then you stop using your opiates. And so you never have to go through withdrawal, which of course has been the biggest barrier to people getting treatment who wanted it, is having to go through withdrawal. And people who use drugs have been saying for years, just provide us with something to get through the withdrawal and we'll be fine. And the data is now showing that as well, that it is not medication assisted treatment. The medication is the treatment. People do just as well with or without counseling as long as they get the medication. Lo and behold, drug users who have access to or possession of buprenorphine use it mostly as it would be prescribed. People who use drugs understand pharmacology. And so we do a lot of that now. So there's less necessity for people to come into the office. Although we like it, we like people to come in. We're very proud of the relationships we build and that sort of thing. But like through the, during the pandemic, the last couple of years, all our services were provided, our MAP services were provided through telemedicine for obvious reasons. And I know there are a number of programs in the Bay Area and I believe in Southern California where they actually do have mobile buprenorphine programs. And that's something we hope to build up to in a short period of time. Partly why we are partnering with a group called Sacramento Street Medicine, which is a group of young medical care providers, doctors, MDs, PAs, NPs, DOs, all of them, who go to the camps for people experiencing homelessness and provide them with medical services every weekend. And we partner with them and go out with them so that we provide syringe services to folks in the camps alongside the street medicine folks. And we just see that as a natural partnership. And what both of the agency's goals is to figure out and find the funding for a mobile buprenorphine program.
So, back up a little. So there was a legalization, right? Or authorized syringe services, right? So what changed in your program from being unauthorized to authorization?
Well, we were able to get an office, a facility that we could function out of. And I like that we provide almost all of our services through delivery and true street outreach. But I also see a need for a facility. Actually, I see a need for a lot of facilities. As I said, it's 1,000 square miles. But safe spaces where people who use drugs can go and get love and kindness, respect, dignity, accurate information, supplies and equipment that they need, the whole thing, and can help build a community. The biggest tactic that the drug warriors use is divide and conquer. And they've been very, very successful at it. Of course, if you give me $40 million a year, we could probably do some shit too. But anyway, divide and conquer. So part of what we try to do at SANE is try to, facilitate the development of a sense of community. Because contrary to public stereotype, people who use drugs care about their own health. They care about the health of their community. They care about the quality of life in their community and are willing to put efforts into improving that. And are very good at it. And so I think it's helpful for us to have a facility where people can come and gather in a safe space to help nurture that sort of thing along.
Yeah.
We had a women's program. It's currently unfunded, and it's not exactly as active as it was. We had an herbalist working with us for a number of years, and we had a women's only day syringe services program, and she would come and she'd get these herbal balms she would make and give the women hand massages while we chatted and talked, and they got their supplies and that sort of thing. So for those kinds of programs, we also offer free yoga lessons on site, taught by a person who used to. So we believe that trying to facilitate the and support a sense of community development also is important in the partnerships and collaborations we make with other social service agencies like Sacramento Street Medicine. We also partner with Oak Park Outreach Services, which was Hurley Marikell's program. He was with SANE from the beginning, and which is a predominantly African American agency, and he served Oak Park, which at the time was the predominantly African American neighborhood, now being gentrified, of course. And we also partner with sex workers, SWOP, SWAP, Sex Workers Outreach Project. Again, complementary services. We provide them with a lot of supplies and training, and they do syringe services for their participants. But I guess I should say, at the beginning, there weren't a lot of us. Not a lot of people even knew what harm reduction was. God damn
It's
it.
okay. Take your time.
Oh, and so we knew that the other services besides syringe services needed to be provided. Handing out condoms, doing education, that sort of thing. But because we were unauthorized for so long, we couldn't get enough funding to pay staff. We had to be all volunteer for many, many years. But we wanted to have a harm reduction services center where people could come and get other harm reduction services, and they could go after county grants and that sort of thing, and actually build a center, as long as they did everything except syringe services. So we founded another organization called Harm Reduction Services. It really reached for the creativity there, but anyway, and we figured that they would provide all the other services, and SANE would be out here doing the same thing on a smaller scale, but mostly syringe services. And then at the time, there was a really large national study being done by the PI, I believe, was Dr. Peter Lorre, and he was studying the whole idea of syringe services because everybody said it would get people to use younger, use more, more people would use, all that sort of stuff. It would cause more harm than it would do. So he was doing this study to gather the efficacy data around syringe services. So we figured when that came out, and it showed that syringe services do nothing but good, they don't do any harm, that then the county would authorize it and the county would fund it and take over the bulk of services. There would always be need for CBOs, community-based organizations, for specific populations like SWAP and Oak Park Outreach Services, that sort of thing. Because government isn't the most efficient and effective way to provide services, but they can do volume. And when we were fighting the epidemic, the idea was volume. Our goal every year was to give out more syringes than we did the year before. And we did needs-based distribution. We knew one-on-one was bad public health practice, and so we wanted people to have what they needed to have a one shot, one syringe.
Also, maybe where the syringes actually came from.
Oh, right. Well, Nason gave us the startup grant, like they've done for a lot of programs, and then we wrote grants to private philanthropic foundations that were supportive of the idea of harm reduction and syringe services in particular to support the programs, and they give us the money to get the supplies. The grants were never large enough to pay staff. Nobody ever wanted to pay for staff. And they were limited in scope. They had to either, at the beginning, it always had to be presented as a pilot program. Damn it.
Do you remember who was funding Syringe?
Comer Foundation, the Syringe Access Fund came in a little later. Levi Strauss, Elton John,
Tides Foundation?
Tides Foundation, yeah. Franz, be quiet.
Thank you.
Yeah, Elizabeth Taylor, of course, was big early on in AIDS. She did a whole lot of really good stuff for HIV by lending her name. Okay, so we thought that as soon as the data came out and showed that, it was good public health, it did good and did no harm, that the county would take it over, provide the bulk of syringe services, and we could go back to our regular lives. We figured it would take max 3-4 years. We're now 30 years in. Next year we'll be 30 years into it, and that hasn't happened yet. Surprise. So SANE is still doing the bulk of syringe services, and the county will provide, for instance, they gave us a contract to provide water, garbage bags, and the lock zone to people experiencing homelessness that are living in camps. And we go out every day and do that on the county's dime. They still won't fund syringes. Has to do with the federal ban and all of that sort of stuff. But it just never happened as we thought it might. One thing I do want to mention without being asked, just because I don't want to forget it, in that same Sero survey showed that 96% of the people who injected drugs in our region were positive for hepatitis C. This is nothing new. This was all over the country. So we did a lot of work around HCV prevention as well. There was a lot of, ivory tower research being done around how long, HIV or HCV lives in a syringe, how can you destroy it, all the prevention stuff we take for granted now was just being explored and developed in these early years. And they were not providing treatment to people who use drugs for hepatitis C. The requirement for treatment was you had to prove you hadn't used drugs for 2 years in order to qualify. Again, based on the bigoted idea that users will just keep using and getting reinfected and they'll waste all these resources. So my partner, Jim Britton, who started SANE with me, was, like the rest of us, positive for hepatitis C. And his physicians told him that if he quit using for 2 years, stopped smoking, took salt out of his diet, he was a big man, they would get him a new liver. Thank you. Sorry. And he did all of that. And he went to him and said, I'm ready, I'm qualified. They had never put him on the list because they did not believe that drug users could actually change their behavior. And so Jim died for lack of treatment. Sorry. This is what it was like in those years. A lot of sorrow, a lot of loss. We went to a lot of funerals. So anyway, I just always want to make sure that Jim's name is recognized for the services he provided. in those early years,
Could you talk a little bit more about him just as a person?
yeah, I'm going to do that. In those early years, I did the paperwork, the grant writing, the data tracking. I was the epidemiologist. And Jim did most of the syringe slinging. I did some of it, but both of us had full-time jobs like everybody else did in those days. And so that's how we divided up the labor. Jim hated conferences. I think he went to 2 with me and went to 1 session and spent the rest of his time in his room. He wasn't into networking and that sort of stuff. He just wanted to sling rigs. So I did the conferences as well. He was an incredible human being. Like I said, he was a counselor at the methadone clinic practicing harm reduction therapy, what we now know as harm reduction therapy, but it wasn't known at the time. Fortunately, his boss is the one who brought the idea of harm reduction to Sacramento. Dr. Jack McCarthy, he owned the clinic, and he went to the DPA conferences and brought the idea back. He's the one who formed the local task force. And Jim was an incredible artist. He blew glass. He used to make some of the most beautiful pieces of glass art. Usable glass art and decorative glass art. He was brilliant at that. And he had, like the rest of us, he had a little twisted sense of humor. But he had a heart as big as all outdoors. I miss him to this day. One little kind of anecdote about Jim. When Franz came to work with us, he's like the Brits and the Aussies, says cheers a lot for goodbye. And one day Jim came over to pick up some more rigs because we stored them at our house, of course. And he said, by the way, why does Franz always say cheese at the end of a conversation? So we always call Jim the Big Cheese now. But this program owes its heart and soul to Jim. That's just the way that is. So where was I?
What are some innovations that SANE has done during this time that has helped support our community?
One of the things that I think we're most proud of at SANE is our training and support program. In the early years, there were a lot of, as I said before, debates about whether satellite syringe services was viable, effective, or should be done. There was a lot of pushback on that you were giving up control of supplies and the messaging and all of that, and that if you give it to drug users to do, they will screw it up, right? And so you had to maintain control of your messaging and your supply distribution processes as much as possible, and that meant not like allowing people to get syringes for their friends, which was being called secondary syringe exchange at the time. Jim Britton was adamant that that was not appropriate labeling, that if you had to have a hierarchical designation in the primary and secondary syringe exchangers, that the people, the program participants were the primary exchangers, and that the programs were the secondary exchangers. And that's why we use the term satellite. Jim always argued, and I agreed with him 1,000%, that the program participants distributed way more syringes than our staff. Between 89 and 94% of the people that we contact directly exchange for an average of 10 other people each, or provide services for an average of 10 other people each. It allows us to target networks as opposed to individuals, so that you're always focusing on distribution of your message and your supplies. So we've run that for a very long time, that methodology. Well, from day one, that's been our methodology. So we eventually decided that we would provide a little bit more formal training and support program for satellite exchangers that, because we had the methodology worked out and it was stable within the organization. So if we kind of formalized it a little bit more on the next level out, then they would get stronger at doing the same thing with the next level out. And we would be getting way more people that aren't ever going to contact or not regularly contact the program directly, which is fine. So we designed a training and support program for satellite syringe exchangers, or satellite syringe providers, services providers. And we got together once a month, and we had like a 4-hour meeting. We paid people for their time and expertise that they brought to the meeting. The first half of the meeting was an education session. The group would pick a topic that they wanted to learn about, and we would bring in people to, like if it was a medical topic, we would bring in doctors. If it was a legal topic, we would bring in our criminal defense attorney presented to the group, and they would come in and present a 10-15 minute spiel, and the rest of the time was for the participants to do Q&A. And folks love this. You know, they love the fact that these big mucky mucks, if you will, wanted to, and people clamored to come and train in our program. And then the second half of the meeting was a meal. Because when we first brought the program together, none of the participants knew each other. They all did different social networks. And we always felt that breaking bread with people was one of the best ways to start building bonds. So the staff would cook and prepare a meal, and we had it at our house out in our backyard, barbecue style, and we would serve everybody. And that would be the time that they just networked with each other. And it was a brilliant success. The state actually got into funding it for a couple of years. So we were able to reimburse people for travel as well as pay them for their time and expertise. And then Governor Schwarzenegger decided that HIV prevention wasn't that important, and he cut all prevention services. And in 1 year, because of that decision, SANE lost 40% of its funding in a 2-week period. We signed the contracts, and 2 weeks later it was gone. So that was a big hit, and the program got a little shaky and kind of faded away. And then the other problems occurred with our office was technically located 2 blocks outside of city limits, and we weren't authorized at that time for outside city limits. So the county revoked our business license and the landlord evicted us. So then we had 8 more months of no office. And we were back to operating the program outside of our home. But last August, we've got another facility I'm proud to say, in another very underserved part of town, in the north area, on the north side of the river, where there are very few services of any kind, let alone harm reduction services. And so we are starting up the training and support program again. And I think that's a really strong program. Folks really love the access to knowledge, because they are out there right in the midst of all the myths and misinformation. They're seen as kind of experts in their field, providing syringe services. And so they liked having access to the best information we could get them access to. They liked the camaraderie. By the time the group stopped meeting regularly, they were all great friends, helped each other move, babysat their pets, worked on each other's cars. It was a brilliant community building exercise, if you will. It was difficult sometimes. We were still, unfortunately, losing people at an alarming rate. But I think it's one of the strongest programs we've ever built, and I'm quite proud of it.
Did you want to talk about your diagnosis and like how the organization?
Oh, right. We'll just start with I'm old, and I was coming to the age where they look at you and go, "Aren't you retired yet?" And we've seen so many programs, especially arm reduction based programs, were almost all started by political activists. Mostly it came out of the ACT UP movement for HIV in the early years. And I didn't want to see, well, I was seeing agencies fall apart because there were big changes of administrators at the top of programs, if you will. And when the activists moved out, or the activists didn't know how to run a business organization, which is two different things, organizations were imploding. So I started talking to Shiloh Jama about what's a better way to transition leadership without destroying the program, and keeping the program's mission and goals intact. And so we agreed that we would do that. We would do co-directorship for a couple of years, and he would move down here from Seattle, Washington, and he would come in gradually, and we'd work together for a couple of years, and I'd pull out. Well, about 6 months before he was scheduled to move down here, I was diagnosed with lung cancer, and the urgency went up. And Shiloh very graciously moved his date up 6 months, came down here, moved in with us, helped friends take care of me, and the whole harm reduction community stood up and put their arms around me and got me through it. Colleagues stood up and said, whatever grants you got in the pipeline, don't worry about it, we'll finish them. They did. We got the money. I can't tell you how many times I was told, don't worry, take care of yourself, we'll take care of Sane. We're not going to let Sane die. Catherine Swanson told me that a cancer diagnosis allows you to experience gratitude and love and depth in ways you've never even thought of before, and that's absolutely true. Sane probably would be dead at this point if it hadn't been for the support and concrete, realistic support provided by members of the harm reduction community, and I will be forever grateful to have experienced that. But I think it's an important discussion that a lot of agencies need to start having, is how do you transition leadership roles, especially all roles, but especially leadership roles. By definition, it's you almost have to have a hierarchical power structure in your organization. You know, we work and live in the land of greed, and that's how we get our funding, is by participating in those activities. Because it's saying we try to do things as much as possible by consensus. But how do you when it's time to make changes, if we want these agencies to go on for 30, 40, 50 years, like we know the need for these agencies is going to go on for 40, 50 years, we need to start thinking about how we can safely and securely make these kinds of transitions and still keep the harm reduction agenda, if you will, intact, and helping to improve the quality of life for marginalized members of our community. I think our experience at SANE has been really positive. The fact that we were talking about it before the urgency arose was a huge piece, of course, because Shiloh and I did a lot of planning. And Shiloh has come in and done a brilliant job. I am so proud of where the agency is going, and that you have kept the focus on participants, that you are wedded to the evidence-based ideas, that you are wedded to the community building aspects, all of it. I feel completely comfortable and safe, if you will. A lot of times what happens is activists tend to be kind of strong personalities, and a lot of us have a couple of control issues, and we don't like to give up control of our little baby organization that we built, you know, and which is all fine, you know, but I feel completely safe and comfortable turning over control, sort of the organization to Shiloh and Adam and Kimberly and Sonia and Kristen and Eli and Phil, Chantel, and that Sane is in safe hands, and that what we built in the 90s will continue to help people who want help.
Okay, I'm gonna try not to cry. But the kind of question I have is, what advice do you have for that future generation in facing the unknown problems, concerns, future of, you know,
Like the next pandemic?
yeah.
I would say almost what I just said. Decide what your mission is. You know, for us, it was HIV and syringes and condoms, and fighting stigma. And then figure out what services you can provide in an effective manner that actually effectively and efficiently addresses the issue you want to address, whether it's slowing the spread of a disease or stopping an overdose epidemic, you know, that sort of thing. And wedge yourself really strongly to that, and make sure that whatever you do, you're doing through that lens. For us, it's participant focus, staying participant focused. Always making sure that we're listening to participants, we're responding to their requests. That okay, I know how I say it. A lot of times programs, nonprofit agencies pick a topic that they want to work on, and then what funding is available, they design their services to tailor to that funding. Makes sense, right? Harm reductionists, for the most part, tend to identify an issue, identify strategies, processes, whatever, that you can use to address that issue to accomplish your goal with it, and then do it, and then go look for the funding for it, if that makes sense, that difference. I think if you do the second one, the second strategy, decide what you're going to do, decide how you're going to do it, and then figure out how to fund it. It sounds ass backwards, but we do a lot of stuff ass backwards, I guess. I think that's probably one of the most important things. And always include whoever you want to serve in all the major decisions of your agency. Include your program participants in the design of your programs, in the implementation strategies of your programs, in the implementation of your strategies, the evaluation of your strategies. What does the analysis of the evaluation? Always have program participants involved in all of those areas. And always know that by the parameters that we all tend to work with, there's going to be stigma and prejudice. That's how people become marginalized in this country, or this culture, if you will. It's gone. Sorry.
Could you talk a little bit more about that participant involvement piece? Because I observe that a lot of newer harm reduction groups struggle with that a little bit, and I almost don't fully understand why, because it feels like it should be more intuitive.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of folks out there kind of being like, okay, we're trying to do it, and so we're gonna try to create like a PAB. We're gonna talk to people.
We're gonna do best practices.
We're gonna do some interviews every once in a while. But they're not wrong. But
No.
I'm seeing a lot of people struggle with the point I kind of try to make to people is just like, it's a practice. It's like a thing. It's almost like meditating. Like you meditate and you get good at it, and then it just is normal and it's everywhere. So
one of the things that happened when the state was funding the satellite syringe programs, pilot study, of course, we all met in LA, and everybody was talking about their methodology. We happened to be talking about data tracking. Tracking forms and that sort of stuff. And we were asked, did we do surveys of our participants? Because we were talking about participant input. And we said, well, when we're doing a formal research project, yes, we do. But for the most part, no, we have participant satisfaction surveys that can be done anonymously or confidentially all the time. But no, we don't. And one of the outreach workers looked up and said, well, then how do you know what people are thinking? How do you know what to say? And we just we talked to them. And it's just that simple. When you try to formalize it and and I'm the queen of forms, but when you try to make everything in a formal way, that's where you get in your own way. You trip over your own feet. Stop trying to make it such a thing. It is just as simple as talking people. Now, it's also, having said that, it's difficult in that you have to create a space where people feel safe, physically and emotionally, feel valued and respected, and are treated with dignity at each and every encounter, which is a lot harder to do than it is to say. So it's about learning how to talk to people without having to have a survey in front of you, and I know people don't like chit chat and say they don't do well at parties and that sort of thing, but it's conversation. People love to talk about themselves, and they will love to give you feedback on your program, especially if they believe that you're really listening, if they believe that you will take what they say and actually work with it. And then occasionally, I like quarterly or twice a year, you do a little more formal thing, maybe a focus group, or you tally up your participant satisfaction surveys, which I think are vitally important. That's also another way of saying your opinion is so important, I'd like you to put it on paper for us. That sends a message, that then you have to do it. Then you have to actually listen to people, say what they're saying, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you don't like it. And you have to learn how to incorporate some of their feedback into your program to make it more efficient, more effective, higher quality services, or whatever you're trying to do. But that's where most people, I think, get tripped up. It's that listening part, not something human beings tend to be real good at just naturally. You have to work on that. That's a skill. But we have to have that skill in harm reduction to do the services we do if we want to do them well. So I think it's well worth developing. So it is as simple and as complicated as that, if that makes any sense.
Is there any piece of the history that you want to say before we move on? Not that we're not always going to keep talking about history.
Right. No, I can't think of anything that I haven't touched on. I will say one thing that kind of addresses your question as well. When we had the TSP program, Training and Support Program, going, and it was well funded, so we could do good education stuff and serve nice meals and that sort of thing, and compensate people for their time and expertise. The bonding that I saw occur between members of the group and staff with each other, and staff with staff, and staff with the group, and the group with the group, and the group with the staff, and all of that was an amazing process, an amazing thing to do. And when you get to that level, then folks would just spontaneously tell us what they thought, if they thought it was something important. It's like, you're really screwing up here, you know, and we've gotten those. Or, this is really good, we want to expand this. It becomes a natural part of the conversation between your participants, your staff, and the programs. And I think that's incredibly important.
If I ever leave this world alive, well, thank you for the things you did in my life. If I ever leave this world alive, I'll come back down and sit beside your feet tonight. Wherever I am, you'll always be more than just a memory. If I ever leave this world alive, if I ever leave this world alive, I'll take on all the sadness that I left behind. If I ever leave this world alive, the madness that you feel will soon subside. So in a word, don't shed